Welcome to Executives at the Edge, a podcast brought to you by MEF. I'm your host, Pascal Menezes. Join me as we explore thought-provoking perspectives from the leaders and changemakers who are propelling enterprise digital transformation forward. I'm really so excited to have Shamus McGillicuddy. He's the Vice President of Research from Enterprise Management Associates. And today, I'm really excited to talk about Zero Trust. I mean, Shamus, Zero Trust is on top of everybody's mind, but it's riddled full of a lot of complexities that most people don't really understand. And I know we heard about Zero Trust Network Access, ZTNA, Zero Trust overall as a framework. So all of these things have to come together in a big ecosystem, make it work right. So with that, Shamus, could you tell us, our listeners, a little bit about yourself and EMA and what you guys do?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Research at EMA. I am an industry analyst. I focus on network infrastructure and operations in the enterprise world. So I conduct market research and consulting around how enterprises design, build, and manage their networks. This particular focus on observability, automation, adopting new technologies for network transformation. My background is journalism. I was a newspaper journalist for a number of years, and then after that, I spent like a decade in IT journalism with TechTarget, covering the networking industry. I ran the news team for all their networking publications. And then for the last decade, I've been an industry analyst at EMA.
Hey, Shamus, I heard that EMA has released out a Zero Trust report. So maybe for our listeners, can you just talk a little bit about that report?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I do at EMA is I survey thousands of companies and talk to dozens of practitioners. Every couple months, I publish research based on various market research studies I do. And in December of this year, we are publishing a report called Zero Trust Networking, how the network team supports cybersecurity, based on a survey of 270 IT professionals who are engaged with some kind of zero trust efforts inside their company.
Yeah, so that is really, really sounding important now because cybersecurity is top of mind of every company. So look, first of all, I think just maybe a precursor, what is Zero Trust? Really simple version of that. But why is it important for network infrastructure teams to be involved in Zero Trust and the strategy around it?
Yeah, so Zero Trust is the concept of least privilege access, limiting access only to what is explicitly authorized and in continuously verifying that access is appropriate. There are a lot of other ways of describing it. There are multiple organizations out there that are, defining it and creating reference architectures around it. If you were to ask practitioners, they'll say it's all about preventing unauthorized access to corporate networks and corporate data. Secondarily, it's also about limiting lateral movement within a network. So, and it involves a variety of technologies. The reason why, now anytime you hear the word security, you're going to think, well, it's a cybersecurity thing. Cybersecurity teams are obviously going to be all on top of that and implementing a strategy, right? But I, as somebody who sort of focuses in on what the network team is doing, we always see network teams worried about security because it's just part of what they do. They're usually managing firewalls, and they're usually responsible for secure remote access, like a VPN probably lives on like a router in the data center, right? So the reason why it's important for network teams to be involved in a zero trust strategy is that, one, they're subject matter experts on a lot of the enabling technologies like secure remote access solutions, like network segmentation schemes that limit lateral movement. Two, they are going to be laser focused on whether or not any of these changes that are made to security architecture as part of a zero trust effort have a deleterious effect on network performance. Because what you're going to see is quite often when security implements something, it has unforeseen impacts on user experience. Like, hey, I can't log into the net. I can't log onto the network today. Well, that's because security implemented a new access control system, and the network team didn't have any input into it, and now it's having unexpected negative effects on how users are using the network. So if a network team is strategically involved in enabling a zero trust effort in partnership with cybersecurity, they can, one, bring their expertise to bear on implementation, and two, make sure that the network continues to deliver on its core mission, which is connectivity.
But in a SASE environment where zero trust plays an important role, there's multi-tenancy involved. Now, some administrator policy has to go in to that SASE environment, which has zero trust or ZTNA, and everything has to go through that SASE cloud. How do you see all that playing out? Like, does not that administrator that puts the policy in is independent of the guy who runs the network or works with the network part to the SASE cloud? How does that all kind of play out in your mind?
So any enterprise-grade SASE solution or ZTNA solution should have role-based access controls in terms of like who's allowed to do what around access and security controls. So, there should be an admin level control over what's happening in a SASE or ZTNA policy environment, or in the proxy in the cloud, or whatever, however you want to describe it. And that admin level person, who will probably be either someone from network engineering or cybersecurity, will then define what changes can be made to policy controls and security controls by other individuals who have login capabilities in the SASE or ZTNA solution. Now, if you're talking about like the multi-tenancy aspect of like a SASE solution handling traffic from like dozens or hundreds of customers in their cloud proxy, that's something that they're going to have to provide guarantees around isolation of customer traffic and data within their proxy, which is something they can do through a variety of conversations with customers and showing that they are compliant with various regulations like Fed on-ramp and whatnot. And is actually sort of a reality today anyway in the infrastructure as a service world. Like people are already experienced in validating that, even though they are in a multi-tenant environment in a hyperscaler data center or cloud service, that their workloads, their data is indeed isolated. But there is a reason why there are certain industries like federal contractors, defense industry, finance have been slow to go into the cloud until they saw validation and compliance of federal requirements around security guarantees around data and sovereignty and so forth. So, it is a process, and you'll see some industries that be reluctant to rely on something like SASE for zero trust security.
So what are the challenges companies face within, deploying or encountering zero trust initiatives?
So in our research, first off, we asked them, hey, how would you describe your success so far with trying to implement Zero Trust? And only 35% described their efforts as a complete success. The rest saw some room for improvement. Some saw a lot of room for improvement. I think 4% described it as an actual failure. And then the rest were kind of in the middle. There's like 60% who are like, yeah, we're doing pretty good, could do better. In terms of challenges, one of the big things they told us was they have budget constraints. That was like the number one business challenge. We don't have enough budget to implement what we're trying to do. Number two issue was lack of personnel with relevant skills, which is something that's been a common theme in the enterprise market for quite a few years now, that they are struggling to find and to hire and retain people with networking and security skills that are capable of implementing something like Zero Trust or something more technology focused like a SASE implementation or an AI implementation or whatever. And so they're struggling to pull together teams that can support whatever their initiatives are. And then on a technical level, they're struggling with integrating whatever they're doing with Zero Trust into their existing infrastructure. So like if they adopt like a Zero Trust Network Access solution, ZTNA, or a SASE solution, Secure Access Service Edge, those technologies are kind of like net new additions to their technology stack, perhaps. Maybe taking out some things that they had in place before, like a VPN, or more likely coexisting with pre-existing stuff. For instance, like a lot of times a secure access service edge technology, SASE, is an evolution of whatever they had for SD-WAN. So they had like a software-defined WAN solution from a well-known networking vendor. To get to SASE, they integrate that with a secure service edge solution that might be from the same vendor, and so the integration is kind of trivial, or might be from a third-party vendor, like a security specialist, and they have to integrate those together, and they're finding that to be extremely painful. And then secondarily, on a technical level, they are finding that they have insufficient network observability capabilities. So like, I hear this a lot. I implemented ZTNA or SASE, which means that like all my user traffic is going through some sort of cloud proxy delivered by that vendor, is, authenticated and authorized and analyzed for potential threats before being forwarded on to my applications in the data center or the cloud. But after it hits that proxy, I lose all sense of where the traffic's going. I don't have a sense of how that proxy is impacting user experience. It's a black hole. So that's an example of having insufficient observability around whatever Zero Trust technology you've adopted. And it can happen elsewhere too. Like for instance, if you've done like a micro-segmentation scheme in your data center, which is one of the reasons why people started deploying like hypervisor-based overlays on their data center fabrics like 8-9 years ago, and are continuing to do so. It introduces a lot of blind spots and east-west traffic unless you alter your monitoring tools to like track what's happening with all this hypervisor or VM to VM traffic in your segmented networks. So that's another example.
So to me, Zero Trust is kind of an evolution from NAC. If you remember NAC, Network Access Control, way back decade plus. It followed the IETF work with all the enforcement points and all that kind of stuff. I can't remember what they were called. But anyways, how do you see Zero Trust deployed? Is it mainly a DIY and the multinationals encompasses all their sites? Because now Campus NAS guys are doing Zero Trust, where by policy your device or application can only do one thing out of the gate, and unless you have the right roles, it can do more east-west things or other things. So interesting. Is it a DIY model, or is it part of a SASE service, or both? I'm trying to understand how this thing is coming to market.
So you can't buy a product and say you have zero trust, because I think it's a combination of multiple things, and I think a lot of people believe they can buy it as a product, or are convincing themselves of that. Like, there are certain vendors that say, like, if you implement our solution, you have zero trust. And they're going to find that no, actually they don't. They have like the beginnings of a zero trust strategy, but not necessarily a complete implementation. Because the whole idea of zero trust is like trust but verify every single network communication on your, every single flow, every single access request, every single transaction. Like, monitor all of it and assume that you are breached, and mitigate that potential breach by limiting lateral movement and limiting the number of potential malicious actors that can get into your network to begin with through stringent access control and through network segmentation that limits that lateral movement. So people to that reality is that it is a DIY implementation, because it's not a single solution that you can get that with. Like, a lot of people are modernizing their secure remote access solutions today. Like, they've had VPN in place forever. They have recognized that VPN is an imperfect solution for a problem, and ZTNA and other related products like SASE, which often includes a ZTNA component or something else, comes along and says, our solution like has very granular authentication capabilities and very granular authorization capabilities, and continuously monitors a solution for suspicious activity. It continually monitors network activity for suspicious behavior. And that supposedly gives you zero trust, right? That gives you a zero trust solution. Well, it provides zero trust control over how people get into your network and get access to your network. But that isn't the complete picture. But what I'm finding in this research, and is kind of like a misconception is in the industry, is that if you apply zero trust controls around your perimeter, then you are good. You've addressed the mandate to implement zero trust. It's only partially implemented, though. ZTNA modernizes how you grant access to your network and open up your network perimeter to outside entities, whether that is remote users, business partners, customers, whatever. But once they get inside, if you've only addressed the access control issue, as you described it, like a new way of doing NAC, then once they're inside, they can do whatever they want. Now, you'll still be monitoring their behavior, but like, you aren't able to block them from doing anything. All you can do is cut off access if you see something that you don't like. But how long is it going to take you to recognize what they're doing as dangerous behavior? It's not necessarily going to be identified quickly enough to ensure that they haven't done damage inside your environment. And that's where the limitation or the limiting of lateral movement becomes more important through network segmentation, saying, okay, you are now in the network and here is what you can access inside the network. And also, we are going to limit the ability of the things that you're accessing to communicate with everything else, because we just assume that we want to give least privilege communication capability to everything inside the network. People are not doing that to as much a great extent as they are doing the zero trust access piece. And you have vendors that have products called zero trust access, but you don't have vendors that are actually selling you do have vendors that are selling like segmentation solutions as well, but they're not implemented as often in as many places as they should be.
So what I'm hearing is zero trust is a big overarching umbrella architecture that involves much of the ecosystem. For example, as you talked about, I have to involve identity providers, right? And then I also have to involve, inside the enterprise, my LAN, my Wi-Fi for access control, and so on.
Yeah.
And then I also have to involve, micro-segmentations at the hyperscaler sides to invoke policies across, their VMs or their containers or whatever. I got to then also control the Zero Trust network access, which is basically my remote users, what can they do, where they can go. So it's not like I can buy out of the box, as you said, a Zero Trust solution and can involve all of this. It's really an ecosystem that has to come together and work together to really enable all of these parts coming together. Is that right?
Yeah, like pretty much. Yeah, like the identity vendors are a foundational piece, and they're integrating with Zero Trust network access providers. So that's one example of like an ecosystem. But also, yeah, the network segmentation stuff is also a big part of this. Now, one thing we didn't mention is like operational technology or Internet of Things. Like, hey, today someone creates a VLAN, right, and says, "This is my operational technology VLAN," and let's say I got a factory and like all the manufacturing equipment, all the robots, all the industrial control systems in that factory get to live in this VLAN. And that's good because it's a form of segmentation that prevents those devices from communicating with sensitive data or applications or whatever. But does it prevent? Is it granular enough to protect communication between all the different types of systems you have in a factory that shouldn't be communicating? Like, is there any reason why, like, a HVAC system in your factory should have a conversation with a robot that is, dropping an engine block into a car? Like. That's where like the micro segmentation piece comes in, and you're suddenly like, okay, I want to put together a system where I can define what conversations are allowed across my network versus like what classes of devices are allowed to exist or coexist together in a large segment of my network. It's about getting more granular and being able to better define what you want to allow in terms of network connections between entities in your network, so that if any one of those things is compromised in some way or spoofed in some way, it still is very limited in who it can talk to. Like, for instance, I never want any OT device in my factory to talk to anything other than the industrial control system that my OT vendor maintains in the cloud. Nothing, it can't talk to anything else. It can't talk to HVAC. It can't talk to security cameras. It can't talk to a guest Wi-Fi access point, whatever, or guest Wi-Fi's SSID. It can only talk to this specific type of communication that I've defined. People see the value of that, but they have not necessarily implemented that because the awareness of the importance of limiting lateral movement in the network is not as high as the importance of limiting unauthorized access to the network from the outside. Both need to be implemented, but there's not one. I haven't seen any vendors out there selling an end-to-end solution that does all of it, or at least does all of it well. And there are other pieces around things like anomaly detection. You might want to have a specific analytics vendor in there that's just monitoring everything and adding a additional layer of scrutiny and sending alerts if they see anything that they don't like, so that you can adjust policy or isolate something that was missed by your ZTNA vendor or your segmentation vendor. And also just like general network observability, I think, is a really important piece of a zero trust strategy, because network monitoring tools that are in the hands of network engineering and operations teams one, can see anomalous behavior and provide additional context to the security questions around Zero Trust, and two, understand how Zero Trust is impacting the actual network experiences, which is really, really important and can make or break a Zero Trust implementation. Like if all the stuff you're doing to implement Zero Trust on your network is making your network like behave like deliver a poor service to the business, and then it's all for naught. Like, because it's just gonna, it's gonna be a disaster if like you've put all these controls in place to protect your network, and suddenly like a person can't get any work done because everything's bogged down by latency added by security controls, incorrect disallowance of connectivity or cutting off connectivity because like it misconstrued behavior is malicious when it wasn't. You need to have tools in place that are watching the network to make sure the network is still performing to the needs of the business with all that security in place.
It sounds like Zero Trust, many people talk about it. There are so many parts to this and the complexity. And I think at the end of the day, the policies are critical, and I don't think human beings will be able to handle them on their own. So I think you'll see a lot of AI come in to say, hey, I'm going to run these simulations, these policies, but these are the things that will be impacted, because it's not a policy by users, policy, like you said, role-based by groups. And there's so much complication involved with so many parts of the ecosystem, and you get a policy wrong, all of a sudden, a flow doesn't work, and now someone's complaining. So it's a very complex world. I mean, the answer is cut off, connectivity to everybody, anything that does need to do business with each other. But that's a fluid, dynamic thing. And sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And in fact, a lot of times we don't know what we don't know. And so we go implement that policy, and all of a sudden people complain. So I think it can be a very, very interesting world as this continue to mature and emerge. But thank you, Shamus. Very, very educational for me, and I'm sure for our listeners. Zero Trust is talked about all the time, but I think very few understand the details that you've kind of highlighted today. So thank you.
Hey, you're welcome. And thanks for having me here. It was a pleasure to talk to you and to speak to your audience.
Thanks for joining us for Executives at the Edge. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe today. Share online a review. Find all our episodes on your favorite podcast platform and at MEF.net.